Hello everyone! I hope you're ready for another adventure, because today Wayne continues to read Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Always remember that as we go through these amazing adventures and read these outstanding stories, all you have to do is press the CC button in your YouTube link in order to follow along with the words. Now I think that Bumblebee will be perfect to join us for today's adventure. Now that Bumblebee's here, let's jump in. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Chapter 11, The Dueling Club. Harry woke on Sunday morning to find the dormitory blazing with winter sunlight, his arm reboned and very stiff. He sat quickly and looked over at Colin's bed. But it had been blocked from view from very high curtains Harry had changed behind yesterday. Seeing that he was awake, Madame Pomfrey came bustling over with a breakfast tray and then began mending and stretching his arm and fingers. All in order, she said, as she clumsily fed him porridge left-handedly. When you're finished eating, you may leave. Harry dressed as quickly as he could and hurried off the Gryffindor Tower, desperate to tell Ron and Hermione about Colin and Dobby, but they weren't there. Harry left to look for them, wondering where they could have gone on to, and feeling slightly hurt they weren't interested in whether he had his bones back or not. As Harry passed the library, Percy Weasley strolled out of it, looking far better spirits than last time they'd met. "Oh, hello, Harry," he said. "Excellent flying yesterday. Gryffindor had just taken the lead for House Cup. You earned 50 points. You haven't seen Ron or Hermione, have you?" "No, I haven't," said Percy, his smiley fading. "I hope Ron's not in another girl's toilet." Harry forced a laugh, watched Percy walk out of sight, and then headed straight for Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. He couldn't see why Ron and Hermione would be there again, but after making sure that neither Filch nor any prefects were around, he opened the door and heard their voices behind a locked stall. "It's me," he said, closing the door. There was a clunk and a splash, and a gasp from within the stall, and he saw Hermione's eyes peering through the keyhole. "Harry," she said, "you gave us such a fright. Come in. How's your arm?" "Fine," he said, squeezing into the stall. An old cauldron was perched on the toilet, and a crackling from under the rim told Harry they had lit a fire from beneath it. Conjuring up portable, waterproof fires is a specialty of Hermione's. "We'd have come to meet you, but we decided to get started an apologies potion," Ron explained to Harry, with difficulty locking the stall again. "We decided this is the safest place to hide it." Harry started to tell them about Colin, but Hermione interrupted. "We already know. We heard from Professor McGonagall telling Professor Flitwick this morning. That's why we decided we'd better get going. The sooner we get a confession out of Malfoy, the better," snarled Ron. "Do you know what I think? He was in such a foul temper after the Quidditch match, he took it out on Colin." "There's something else," Harry said, watching Hermione tearing the bundles of knotgrass and throwing them into the potion. "Dobby came to visit me in the middle of the night." Ron and Hermione looked up amazed. Harry told them everything Dobby had told him, or hadn't told him. Hermione and Ron listened with their mouths open. "The Chamber of Secrets has been opened before," Hermione said. "This settles it," said Ron in a triumphant voice. "Lucius Malfoy must have come from the chamber when he was at the school here, and now he told his son Draco how to do it. It's obvious. Wish Dobby had told you what kind of monster is in there. Though I'd want to know how come nobody's noticed it sneaking around the school." "Maybe it can make itself invisible," said Hermione, prodding the leeches into the cauldron. "Or maybe it can disguise itself, pretend to be in a suit of armor or something. I've read that about chameleon ghouls." "You've read too much, Hermione," said Ron, pouring dead lace switch on top of the leeches. He crumpled up the empty lace switch bag and looked at Harry. "So Dobby stopped you from getting on the train and broke your arm." He shook his head. "You know what, Harry? He doesn't stop trying to save your life. He's going to kill you." Agreed. The news that Colin Creevey had been attacked and was now lying as though dead on the hospital bed had spread through the entire school by Monday morning. The air was suddenly thick with rumor and suspicion. The first years were now moving around the castle in tight-knit groups, as though scared they would be attacked and ventured forth alone. Ginny Weasley, who sat next to Colin Creevey in Charms, was distraught. But Harry felt that Fred and George were going wrong way of cheering her up. They were taking turns covering themselves with fur and boils and jumping out of her behind statues. They only stopped when Percy, apoplectic with rage, told them he was going to wire Mrs. Weasley and tell her Jeannie was having nightmares. Meanwhile, hidden from the teachers, a roaring trade of talismans, amulets, and other protective devices was sweeping the school. Neville Longbottom bought a long, evil-smelling green onion, a pointed purple crystal, and rotting newt tail before other Gryffindor boys pointed out that he was in no danger. He was a pureblood and therefore unlikely to be attacked. "They went for Filch first," Neville said, his round face fearful. "And anyone knows I'm almost a squib." In the second week of December, Professor McGonagall came around as usual, collecting names of those who would be staying at school for Christmas. Harry, Ron, and Hermione signed her list. They had heard that Malfoy was staying when struck them as very suspicious. The holidays would be the perfect time to use the Apologies potion and try to worm a confession out of him. Unfortunately, the potion was only half finished. They still needed the bicorn and broomslag skin, and the only place they were going to get that was from Snape's private stores. Harry privately felt he'd rather face Slytherin's legendary monster than let Snape catch him robbing his office. Agreed. What we need, said Hermione briskly as Thursday afternoon's double potions lesson loomed near, is a diversion. Then one of us can sneak into Snape's office and take what we need. Harry and Ron looked at her nervously. I think I'd better do the actual stealing, Hermione continued in a matter-of-fact tone. You two will be expelled if you get in any more trouble, and I've got a clean record. So all you need to do is cause mayhem to keep Snape busy for 5 minutes or so. Harry smiled feebly. Deliberately causing mayhem in Snape's potion class was about as safe as poking a sleeping dragon in the eye. Potions lessons took place in large dungeons. Thursday afternoon's lesson proceeded in the usual way. 20 cauldrons stood steaming between the wooden desks, on which stood brass scales and jars of ingredients. Snape prowled through the fumes, making wappish remarks about the Gryffindor's work while the Slytherin sniggered appreciatively. Draco Malfoy, who was Snape's favorite student, kept flicking pufferfish eyes at Ron and Harry, who knew that if they retaliated, they would get detention faster than you could say unfair. Harry's swelling solution was far too runny, and he had his mind on more important things. He was waiting for Hermione's signal, and he'd hardly listened to Snape pause or sneer at his watery potion. When Snape turned and walked off to bully Neville, Hermione caught Harry's eye and nodded. Harry ducked swiftly from behind his cauldron, pulled one of Fred Filibuster's fireworks from out of his pocket, and gave it a quick prod with his rod. The firework began to fizz and sputter. Knowing he had only seconds, Harry straightened up, took aim, and lobbed it into the air. It landed right on top of Goyle's cauldron. Goyle's potion exploded, showering the class. People shrieked as splashes of swelling solution hit them. Malfoy got a face and his nose began to swell like a balloon. Goyle blundered around, his hands over his eyes, which had exploded to the size of dinner plates. Snape was trying to restore calm and find out what had happened. Through the confusion, Harry saw Hermione slip quietly into Snape's office. "Silence! Silence!" he roared. "Anyone who has been splashed, come here for deflating daft. When I find out who did this." Harry tried not to smile as he watched Malfoy hurry forward, his head drooping from the weight of a nose like a melon. As half the class lumbered forward to the Snape's cauldron, some weighted down with arms like clubs, others unable to talk through gigantic puffed lips. Harry saw Hermione slide back into the dungeon, the front of her robes bulging. When everyone had taken a swig of antidote and the various swellings had subsided, Snape swept over Goyle's cauldron, scooped out the twisted black remains of the firework. There was a sudden hush. "If I ever found out who threw this," Snape whispered, "I will make sure that person is expelled." Harry arranged his face into what he hoped was a puzzled expression, and the bell that rang 10 minutes later could not have been more welcome. "He knew it was me," Harry told Ron and Hermione as they hurried back to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. "I could tell." Hermione threw the new ingredients into the cauldron and began to stir feverishly. "I'll be ready in 2 weeks," she said happily. "Snape can't prove it was you," said Ron reassuringly to Harry. "What can you do?" "Knowing Snape, something foul," said Harry as the potion frothed and bubbled. A week later, Harry, Ron, and Hermione were walking across the entrance when they saw a knot of people gathered around a notice board, reading a signed parchment that had been pinned up. Seamus Finnegan and Dean Beckman beckoned them over. They looked excited. "They're starting a dueling club," said Seamus. "First meeting is tonight. I wouldn't mind dueling lessons. They might come in handy one of these days." "What, you reckon Slytherin's monster can duel?" said Ron. But he too read the sign with interest. "Could be useful," he said to Harry and Hermione as they went into dinner. "Shall we go?" Harry and Hermione were all for it. So at 8 that evening, they hurried back to the Great Hall. The long dining room tables had vanished, and a golden stage had appeared along one wall, lit by thousands of candles floating overhead. The ceiling was velvetly black once more, and most of the school seemed to be packing beneath it, all carrying their wands and looking excited. "I wonder who will be teaching us," said Hermione, as they edged to the chattering crowd. "Someone told me Flickwit was a dueling champion when he was young. Maybe it will be him." "As long as it's not," Harry began, but he ended in a groan. Gilderoy Lockhart was walking onto the stage, resplendent in robes of deep plume and accompanied by none other than Snape, wearing his usual black. Lockhart waved an arm of silence and called, "Gather around, gather round. Can everyone hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. Now, Professor Dumbledore granted me permission to start this little dueling club to train you all in case you ever need to defend yourselves, as I may have done on countless occasions. For fulfilling details, see my published work." "Let me introduce my assistant, Professor Snape," said Lockhart, flashing a wide smile. "He tells me he knows a little tiny bit about dueling himself and has been sportingly agreeing to help me with a short demonstration before we begin. Now, I don't want any of you youngsters to worry. You'll still have your potions, Master, when I'm through with him. Never fear." Wouldn't it be good if they finished each other off? Ron muttered into Harry's ear. Agreed. Snape's upper lip was curling. Harry wondered why Lockhart was still smiling. If Snape had been looking at him like that, he'd have been running faster as he could in the opposite direction. Lockhart and Snape turned to face each other and bowed. At least Lockhart did, with much twirling of his hands, whereas Snape jerked his head irritably. Then they raised their wands like swords in front of them. As you see, we are holding our wands at the accepted combat position, Lockhart told the silent crowd. On the count of 3, we will cast our first spells. Neither one of us will be aiming to kill, of course. I wouldn't bet on that, Harry murmured, watching Snape baring his teeth. 1, 2, 3. Both of them swung their arms above their heads and pointed them at their opponent. Snape cried, Expelliarmus! There was a dazzling flash of scarlet light, and Lockhart blasted off his feet. He flew backwards from off the stage, smashed into the wall, and slid down into a sprawl once more. Malfoy and the other Slytherins cheered. Hermione was dancing on her tiptoes. Do you think he's alright? She squealed through her fingers. Who cares? Said Ron and Harry together. Lockhart was getting unsteadily to his feet. His hat had fallen off and his wavy hair was standing on end. Well, there you have it, he said, tottering back onto the platform. That was a disarming charm. As you see, I've lost my wand. Ah, thank you, Miss Brown. Yes, an excellent idea to show that, Professor Snape. But if you don't mind my saying, it was obvious that you were going to do that. If I had wanted to stop you, it would have been way too easy. However, I felt it instructive to let them see. Snape was looking murderous. Possibly Lockhart had noticed because he had said, Enough demonstrating. I'm going to come amongst you now and put you all into pairs. Professor Snape, if you'd like to help me. They moved through the crowd, matching up partner. Lockhart teamed Neville with Justin Filch-Fitchley, but Snape reached Harry and Ron first. Time to split up the dream team, I think, he sneered. Weasley, you pair with Finnegan. Potter? Harry moved automatically towards Hermione. I don't think so, Snape said, smiling coolly. Mr. Malfoy, come here. Let's see what you make of the famous Harry Potter. And you, Miss Granger, your partners can be Miss Bulstrode. Malfoy strutted over, smirking. Behind him walked a Slytherin girl who reminded Harry of the picture he'd seen in the holidays with hags. She was large and square, her heavy jaw jutted aggressively. Hermione gave a weak smile, but she did not return hers. Face your partners, called Lockhart, back of the platform, and bow. Harry and Malfoy inclined their heads, not taking their eyes off each other. Wands at the ready, shouted Lockhart. When I count to 3, cast your charms to disarm your opponents. Only disarm them. We don't want any accidents. 1, 2, 3. Harry swung his wand high, but Malfoy had already started on 2. His spell hit Harry so hard he felt as though he had been hit overhead with a saucepan. He stumbled, but everything still seemed to be working. Wasting no more time, Harry pointed his right hand at Malfoy and shouted, Respitara! A jet of light whizzed and hit Malfoy in the stomach, and he doubled over Weasley. I said disarm only! Lockhart shouted in alarm over the heels of the battering crowd. As Malfoy sank to his heels, Harry had hit him with a tickling charm, and he could barely move for laughing. Harry hung back with a vague feeling it would be unsporting to bewitch Malfoy while he was on the floor. But this was a mistake. Gasping for breath, Malfoy pointed his wand at Harry's knees and choked. Tartalega! In the next second, Harry's legs began to jerk around out of control within a quick step. Stop! Shouted Lockhart, but Snape took charge. Finite incantatem, he shouted. Harry's feet stopped dancing, Malfoy stopped laughing, and they both looked up. A haze of greenish smoke was hovering over the scene. Both Neville and Justin were lying on the floor panting. Ron was holding up an ashen-faced Seamus, apologizing for whatever had broken wand had done. But Hermione and Maleficent Bloodstone were still moving. Maleficent had Hermione in a headlock, and Hermione was whimpering in pain. Both their wands lay forgotten on the floor. Harry leapt forward and pulled Millicent off. It was difficult. She was a lot bigger than he was. Dear, said Lockhart, skidding through the crowd, looking at the aftermath of the duel. Up you go, Macmillan. Careful there, Miss Fawcett. Pinch it hard. It'll stop bleeding in a second. I think you better teach them how to block unfriendly spells, said Lockhart, standing flustered in the midst of the hall. He glanced at Snape, whose blank eyes glinted, and looked quickly away. Let's have a volunteer pair, Longbottom and Fitch-Fitchley. How about you? A bad idea, Professor Lockhart, said Snape, like a large and beneficent bat. Longbottom causes devastation with the simplest spells. We'll be sending what's left of Fitch-Fitchley up to the hospital wing in a matchbox. Neville's round, pink face went pinker. How about Malfoy and Potter, said Snape with a twisted smile. Excellent idea, said Lockhart, gesturing Malfoy and Harry into the middle of the hall as the crowd backed away to give them room. Now, Harry, said Lockhart, when Draco points his wand at you, I want you to do this. He raised his wand, attempted a complicated sort of wiggling action, and dropped. Snape smirked, and Lockhart quickly picked it up, saying, "Whoops, my wand was a little overexerted." Snape moved closer to Malfoy, bent down, and whispered something in his ear. Malfoy smirked too. Harry looked up nervously at Lockhart and said, "Professor, could you show me that blocking thing again?" "Scared?" muttered Malfoy, so that Lockhart couldn't hear him. "You wish," said Harry, out of the corner of his mouth. Lockhart cupped Harry merrily on the shoulder. "Just do what I did, Harry." "What? Drop my wand?" But Lockhart wasn't listening. 3, 2, 1, go, he shouted. Malfoy waved his wand and quickly bellowed, "Serpensatordia!" The end of the wand exploded. Harry watched aghast as a long black snake shot out of it, fell heavily onto the floor between them, and raised itself ready to snag. There were screams as the crowd backed swiftly away, clearing the floor. "Don't move, Potter," said Snape lazily, clearing and enjoying the sight of Harry standing motionless, eye to eye with an angry snake. "I'll get rid of it." "Allow me," shouted Lockhart. He brandished his wands, and at the snake there was a loud bang. The snake, instead of vanishing, flew 10 feet in the air and back to the floor with a loud smack. Enraged, hissing furiously, it slithered straight towards Justin foolishly and raised itself again, fangs poised ready to strike. Harry wasn't sure what got into him. He wasn't even sure what he was doing. All he knew is that his legs were carrying him forward as though he was one of the casters, and that he had shouted stupidly at the snake, "Leave him alone!" and miraculously, inexplicably, the snake slumped to the floor, docile as a thick garden hose. Its eyes on Harry now. Harry felt the fear drain out of him. He knew that the snake wouldn't attack anyone now, though he knew he couldn't have explained it. He looked up at Justin, grinning, and expecting Justin to look relieved or puzzled or even grateful, but certainly not angry and scared. "What do you think you're playing at?" he shouted before Harry could say. Justin turned around and stormed out. Snape snapped forward, waved his hand, and the snake vanished in a small puff of black smoke. Snape, too, was looking at Harry in an unexpected way. It was shrewd and calculating look, and Harry didn't like it. He was also dimly aware of an ominous muttering around the walls. Then he felt a tugging on his robes. "Come on," said Ron's voice in his ear. "Move, come on." Ron steering him out of the hall, Hermione hustling beside them. As they went to the door, the people on the other side drew away from them as frightened or catching something, and neither Ron or Hermione explained anything until they had dragged him all the way to the Gryffindor common room. Then Ron pushed Harry into the armchair and he said, "You're a parcel mouth? Why didn't you tell that?" "I'm a what?" "A parcel mouth," said Ron. "You can talk to snakes." "I know," said Harry. "I mean, that's only the second time I've ever done it. I accidentally set a boa constrictor on my cousin Dudley at the zoo once. Long story, but it was telling me it had never seen Brazil, that sort of thing, and I was wanting to free it. That was before I even knew I was a wizard." "A boa constrictor told you it had never lived in Brazil," Ron repeated faintly. "So," said Harry, "I bet loads of people can do it." "Oh, no they can't," said Ron. "It's not a very common gift." "Harry, this is bad." "What's bad?" said Harry, starting to feel quite angry. "What's wrong with everyone? Listen, if I hadn't told the snake not to attack Justin..." "Oh, that's what you said to it." "What do you mean? You were there. You heard me." "You were speaking parcel tongue," said Ron. "Snake language. You could have been saying anything." No wonder Justin panicked. "You sounded like you were egging on the snake or something. It was creepy, you know." Harry gaped at them. "I spoke a different language, but I didn't realize... How can I speak a different language without knowing that I speak it?" Ron shook his head. Both he and Hermione were looking as though someone had died. Harry couldn't see what was so terrible. "Do you want to tell me what's wrong with stopping a massive snake from biting off Justin's head?" he said. "What does it matter how I did it as long as Justin didn't have to join the headless hunt?" "It matters," said Hermione, speaking in a less hushed voice, "because being able to talk to snakes is what Salazar Slytherin was famous for. That's why the symbol of Slytherin is a serpent." Harry's mouth fell open. "Exactly," said Ron, "and now the whole school's going to think that you're his great-great-great-great-grandson or something." "But I'm not," said Harry with a panic that he couldn't explain. "You'll find that hard to prove," said Hermione. "He lived about 1,000 years ago. For all we know, you could be." Harry lay awake for hours that night. Through the gap in the curtains around his four-poster, he watched the snow starting to drift past the tower window and wondered, could he be a descendant of Salazar Slytherin? He didn't know anything about his father's family, after all. The Dursleys had always forbidden questions about his wizarding relative. Quietly, Harry tried to say something in Parseltongue. The words couldn't come. It seemed to be face-to-face with the snake to do it. "But I'm in Gryffindor," he thought. "The Sorting Hat wouldn't have put me in here if I had Slytherin blood." And a nasty little voice in his brain. "The Sorting Hat wanted to put you in Slytherin, don't you remember?" Harry turned over. He'd see Justin the next day in herbology and explain that he'd been calling the snake off, not egging it on, which... he thought angrily, pummeling his pillow, any fool should have realized. By the next morning, however. The snow that had begun in the night had turned into a blizzard so thick that the last herbology lesson of the term was canceled. Professor Sprout wanted to fit socks and scarves on the mandrakes, a tricky operation she would entrust to no one else, now that it was so important that the mandrakes grew quickly to revive Miss Norris and Colin Creevey. Harry fretted about this next to the fire in the Gryffindor common room, while Ron and Hermione used their time to play a game of wizard chess. "For heaven's sake, Harry," said Hermione, exasperated as Ron's bishop wrestled her knight off his horse and dragged him off the board. "Go find Justin if it's so important to you." So Harry got up and left through the portrait hole, wondering where Justin might be. The castle was darker than it usually was in the daytime because of the thick, swirling gray snow at every window. Shivering, Harry walked past classrooms where lessons were taking place, catching snatches of what was happening within them. Professor McGonagall shouting at someone who, by the sound of it, had turned his friend into a badger. Resisting the urge to look, Harry walked by, thinking that Justin might be using his free time to catch up on some homework and deciding to check the library first. A group of Hufflepuffs, who should have been in herbology, were indeed sitting in the back of the library, but they didn't seem to be working. Between the long lines of bookshelves, Harry could see that their heads were close together and having what looked to be an absorbing conversation. He couldn't see whether Justin was among them. He was walking towards them when something of what they were saying met his ears, and he paused to listen, hidden in the visibility section. "So anyway," a stout boy was saying, "I told Justin to hide up in our dormitory. I mean to say, if Potter's marked him down as his next victim, it's best if he keeps a low profile for a while. Of course, Justin's been waiting for something like this to happen ever since he let it slip to Potter he was Muggle-born. Justin actually told him he'd be down for eating. That's not the kind of thing you bandy about with Slytherin's heir on the loose, is it? You definitely think it is Potter." "Then, Ernie," said a girl with blonde ponytails anxiously. "Hannah," said the stout boy solemnly, "he's a parcel mouth. Everyone knows that's the mark of a dark wizard. Have you ever heard of a decent one of those who could talk to snakes? They called Slytherin himself Serpent Tongue." There was some heavy murmuring at this, and Ernie went on. "Remember what was written on the wall? Enemies of the air beware. Potter had some sort of run-in with Filch. Next thing we know, Filch's cat is attacked. That first year Creevey was annoying Potter at the Quidditch match, taking pictures of him while he was lying in the mud. Now, next thing you know, Creevey's been attacked. He always seems so nice though," said Hannah uncertainly. "And, well, he's the one who made you-know-who disappear. He certainly can't be bad, can he?" Ernie lowered his voice mysteriously, and Hufflepuff bit closer, and Harry edged nearer so that he could catch Ernie's words. "No one knows how he survived that attack by you-know-who. I mean to say, he was only a baby when it happened. He should have been blasted to smithereens. Only a really powerful dark wizard could have survived a curse like that." He dropped his voice until it was barely even more than a whisper. "That's probably why you-know-who didn't kill him in the first place. Didn't want another Dark Lord competing with him. I wonder what other powers Potter's been hiding." He couldn't take any more. Clearing his throat loudly, he stepped out from behind the bookshelves. If he hadn't been feeling so angry, he would have found sight that greeted him funny. Every one of the Hufflepuffs looked as though they had been petrified by the sight of him, and color draining out of Ernie's face. "Hello," said Harry. "I'm looking for Justin Filch Fletchley." The Hufflepuffs' worst fears were clearly being confirmed. They all looked fearfully at Ernie. "What do you want from him?" said Ernie in a quivering voice. "I wanted to tell him what really happened with the snake in the dueling," said Harry. Ernie bit his lip. "We were all there. We saw what happened." "Then you noticed that after I spoke, the snake backed off," said Harry. "All I saw," said Ernie stubbornly, though he was trembling as he spoke, "was you speaking parcel tongue and chasing the snake towards Justin." "It didn't chase at him," Harry said, his voice shaking with anger. "It didn't even touch him." "It was a near miss," said Ernie. "And in case you're getting any ideas," he added hastily, "I might tell you that you could trace my family back through 9 generations of witches and warlocks, and my blood's as pure as anyone, so—" "I don't care what sort of blood you got," said Harry fiercely. "Why would I want to attack Muggleborns?" "I've heard that you hate Muggles you live with," said Ernie swiftly. "It's not possible to live with Dursleys and not hate them," said Harry. "I'd like to see you try it." He turned on his heel and stormed out of the library, earning himself a reproving glare from Madame Pince, who was polishing a gilded cover of her large spellbook. Harry blundered up the corridor, barely noticing where he was going, in such a fury. As a result, he walked into something that was very large and solid, which knocked him back to the floor. "Ugh! Oh, Hagrid," Harry said, looking up. Hagrid's face was entirely hidden by a woolly, snow-covered baklava, but it couldn't possibly be anyone else, as he filled most of the corridor with moleskin overcoat. A dead rooster was hanging from his massive gloved hands. "All right, Harry," he said, pulling up the baklava so he could speak. "Why aren't you in class?" "Cancelled," said Harry, getting up. "What are you going on here?" Hagrid held up the limp rooster. "Second one killed this term," he exclaimed. "It's either foxes or a blood-sucking bugbear, and I need the headmaster's permission to put a charmer on the hen coop." He peered at Harry from under his thick, snow-speckled eyebrows. You sure you're alright? You look hot and bothered. Harry couldn't bring himself to repeat what Ernie and the rest of the Hufflepuffs had been saying. It's nothing, he said. I'd better get going, Hagrid. It's Transfiguration next, and I've got to pick up my books. He walked off, mind full of what Ernie had said about him. Justin's been waiting for something to happen to him ever since he let it slip to Harry that he was Muggle-born. He stamped up the stairs and turned around the next corridor, which was particularly dark, the torches extinguished by a long, icy draft that was blowing up the loose window pane. He was halfway down the passageway when he tripped headlong over something lying on the floor. He turned to squint at what had fallen on the floor and felt as though his stomach had dissolved. Justin Fitchley was lying on the floor, rigid and cold, a shock on his frozen face, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. And that wasn't all. Next to him was another figure, the strangest sight Harry had ever seen. Nearly headless Nick, no longer pearly white and transparent, but black and smoky, floating immobilized and horizontal, inches off the floor. His head was half off and his face wore an expression of shock, identical to Justin. Harry got to his feet, breathing fast and shallow, his heart doing a kind of drum roll against his ribs. He looked wildly up and down the corridor and saw a line of spiders scuttling as fast as they could away from the bodies. The only sounds were muffled voices of teachers from the class on the other side. He could run, no one would ever see him lying there. He had to get help. Would anyone believe he had anything to do with this? As he stood there panicking, a door right next to him opened with a bang. Peeves the poltergeist came shooting out. Why, it's Potter, wee Potter, cackling Peeves, knocking Harry's glasses askew as he bounced past him. What's Potter up to? What's Potter lurking? Peeves' eyes stopped, halfway mid-air in a somersault. Up and down he spotted Justin and nearly headless Nick. He flipped right up, filled his lungs up, and before Harry could stop him, attack, attack, attack. Another attack. No mortal or ghost is safe. Run for your lives. Attack. Crash, crash, crash. Another door came flaming open through the corridor. People came flooding out. For several long minutes, there was such a scene of confusion that Justin was in danger of being squashed, and people standing in nearly headless Nick. Harry found himself pinned against the wall as teachers shouted for quiet. Professor McGonagall came running, followed by her own class, one of whom still had black and white striped hair. She used her wand to set off a loud bang, which restored the silence, ordered everyone back into their classes. No sooner had the scene cleared than Ernie's the Hufflepuff arrived, panting at the scene. Caught in the act, Ernie yelled, his face stark white, pointing his finger dramatically at Harry. That will do, Macmillan, said Professor McGonagall sharply. Peeves bobbled overhead, now grinning wickedly. Surveying the scene, Peeves always loved chaos. As the teachers bent over Justin and nearly headless Nick, examining them, Peeves broke into a song. Oh, Potter, you rotter. Oh, what have you done? Killing off students, you think it's good fun. That's enough, barked Professor McGonagall, and Peeves zoomed back away, with his tongue out at Harry. Harry just does this to himself. All the time. Justin was carried away to the hospital wing by Professor Flitwick and Professor Sinasta of the astronomy department. But nobody seemed to know what to do for nearly headless Nick. In the end, Professor McGonagall conjured a large fan out of the air, which she gave to Ernie with instructions to waft nearly headless Nick up the stairs. As this Ernie did, fanning Nick along like a silent hovercraft. This left Harry and Professor McGonagall alone together. This way, Potter, she said. Professor, Harry said at once. I swear I didn't. This is out of my hands, Potter, said Professor McGonagall curtly. They marched in silence around a corner, and she stopped before a large and extremely ugly gargoyle. Lemon drop, she said. This was evidently a pass, because the gargoyle suddenly sprang to life and hopped aside as the wall behind him split in two. Even full of dread for what was coming, Harry couldn't fail to be amazed. Behind the wall was a spiral staircase that was moving smoothly upward like an escalator. As he and Professor McGonagall stepped onto it, Harry heard the wall thud close behind them. They rose upward in circles, higher and higher, until at last, slightly dizzy, Harry saw a gleaming oak door ahead, and a brass knocker in the shape of a griffin. He knew now where he was being taken. This is where Dumbledore lived. Oh wow, that was a lot to really take in with Harry Potter and during his adventures. What do you think, Bumblebee? I agree. Harry definitely needs to be more honest and open with people. But we'll see you on the next adventure, okay? And we hope to see you on the next adventure, here with Wayne Reads. Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to see you again. Bye-bye!